One of the terms you hear kicked around as you start to dig into the civil rights movement is this idea of Jim Crow. And what Jim Crow actually means. It's a term that is used to describe the segregated South that's going to grow after the Civil War period. If you remember the Civil War, President Lincoln will free slaves in rebelling states with the Emancipation Proclamation. The 13th Amendment is passed very quickly after the war, which ends all slavery in the United States. 14th Amendment is going to give former slaves the rights of citizenship, and eventually the 15th Amendment will give black males uh, the right to vote. And so all that happens very quickly. Um, and it wasn't without bumps in the road. They're going to really have a hard time changing the minds of people who have grown up in this slavery based society. It's one thing to change the laws, it's another way to change the accepted social practices, the thoughts and the feelings of these folks. And so, very quickly, you start to see people doing things, legislatures passing laws in these states to keep these former slaves as close to the condition of slavery as they could. And these laws are going to be known as Jim Crow laws. Now, if you look at the picture there, Jim Crow was a caricature of a freed slave that had gained some popularity in some of the literature of the day. And so Jim Crow becomes kind of the symbol for this separated society. You're going to have an awful lot of places that are segregated on skin color. So if you're black, you couldn't eat in restaurants most of the time. You couldn't stay in most um, hotels or motels. You couldn't shop in certain stores. Even if you could go in the store, there were certain places you couldn't go. And so the idea was, all right, we may have to live in this same place, but we want the races to be as separate as possible. I want to give you a couple of examples of these Jim Crow laws. In Alabama, no person or corporation shall require any female nurse to nurse in wardrobe rooms in hospitals, either public or private, in which Negro men are placed. There's a lot of rule or words there, and I'm sure that's just because the legal stuff that people are having to go through. But this is again just this idea that you want to keep white women and black men separated. It shall be unlawful for a Negro or white person to play together or in company with each other at any game of pool or billiards. Now, again, that seems kind of trifling. You're playing pool, what difference would it make? But again, you're trying to keep these people separated. If people can come out and get to know each other in these public type of places, they may figure out, wait a minute, these people really aren't that different. And you want to try and keep that from happening if you're the people who are running things in the South. The last one here talks about separate toilet facilities. Two kind of current or pretty current pop culture things that have that in. One is the book and the movie The Help. If you've read that book or seen that movie, you know that separate toilet facilities were a big deal. And then Hidden Figures, which came out, the ladies that had helped the United States get into orbit around the Earth. There's one of the characters that has to struggle with working in a building with whites only restrooms and having to walk back and forth. But again, you're just trying to keep people as separate as possible. Arizona, the marriage of a person of Caucasian blood with a Negro, Mongolian, Malay, or Hindu shall be null and void. And so this probably would have been along the lines of um, in those years after Reconstruction, when they can start to pass these laws because the federal government's not looking as closely. And there may have been some people getting married, and now they're saying, no, you can't actually have married that person. That marriage um, isn't going to be valid anymore. Florida, um, they can't be married or live and occupy the same nighttime room with each other. And this is really going to be current practice. There's another movie several years ago called Loving versus Virginia, which challenged some of these laws. But really, up until the early part of the 1980s. You've got states maybe not enforcing the laws, but with laws in their books um, saying that you couldn't intermarry between the races. One of the things we're going to look at over the next couple of these we're going to do is the idea of separate schools. And so most places set up separate schools for uh, for their children to have to go through. Now, if you remember all the way back in that first civil rights unit, though, we said that there was a court case, Plessy versus Ferguson, which said you can have separate facilities, but they have to be equal. That's right. Separate facilities have to be equal. So Plessy versus Ferguson is saying, all right, you can have separate schools, but those schools have to be equal. Now, the sad reality is they weren't anywhere close to being equal. We're going to take a look at that. Like I said, in some future things that we're going to take a look at. Last one here, Georgia. Again, one there at the beginning that is separating um, black men from women, white women. Second one there, you can't bury people in the ground in mixed races, right? So we want segregation even in the graveyard. And the last one with baseball teams is one that we're going to take a look at next with a guy named Jackie Robinson who's going to break the color barrier. But again, these Jim Crow laws, what you need to get out of this is just these are a set of laws that are trying to keep people of these opposite races or different races, trying to keep people separated. And what it does is it sets up a segregated society in the South. And that segregated society is going to be what we're going to see in the next couple of these Dr. King and people who are working with him or like-minded people who are trying to change these segregated situations in the South.